Okay, so now we're on YouTube. So as we explained last week, I'm going to go over this again. So there are a number of different types of Torah, the way it's transmitted, the number of different ways. Number one, we have the written Torah, what we call the Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah, that would be also known as the 5 books of Moses. We also have the received Torah, that which God gave Moses as an explanation to the written Torah to go along with it. We have the derived Torah, that's which the sages use to derive different laws from words that are hidden within the Torah itself. You have the legislated, those are laws that need to come up at certain times because of different issues that may come up. And so laws can change over time. And then finally, we have customs. All these are true, and all of these are the Torah, and all these are part of Torah and are not to be and are not to be diminished in any way, but we have to recognize these as important in the way the Torah is in any other way. Now, all that being said, there's still a major question that arises, and that is that we find when it comes to the Talmud, the Mishnah, we find many different opinions. Many different opinions come up. You have Hillel and Shammai having their disputes. You have, be it Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon, or there's many different opinions that we see coming up, and they always seem to be conflicting. And it's almost like debate is part of the psyche of the Torah that we study. And so how is it that we could have debate at the very same time that we want to believe that it's God's Torah? And this is what we're going to discuss today. Could there be debate and still be God's Torah? So let's get up my slideshow and let's go through it together. To share or not to share? Take a look at your lesson handbook. So let's take a look at text number 1. Again, it's in the chat. I put a link to it, so you should be able to open it. It opens up right to the Google file. This is a story that came up in New York Times. It's an interesting dilemma. And the dilemma goes as follows. With their packs full, their canteens overflowing, and their reserve bottles filled to the brim, outdoorsy Arizonians set out on foot this time of year under the scorching sun. But as they navigate the state's picturesque trails, they face not only physical challenges, but ethical ones, like how much water to share with strangers who have miles to go and not a drop to drink. The question comes up in the South Mountain, an urban refuge in southern Phoenix, on the 4-mile hike down into Fossil Springs, a couple of hours north, and most definitely along the steep pathways that descend into the Grand Canyon. Wherever it is, hikers regularly encounter strangers gasping trailside from the heat. Anyone ever hiked in Arizona before? No? I don't see anyone raising their hand that they've hiked in Arizona before. Oh, we do have a hand. You did hike in Arizona, so you know what this is talking about.
Yes.
All right, so if it came down to having enough for, so here's the question. If it came down to having enough for myself or helping someone, I'd have to drink my own water, said Laura Craig, a businesswoman who shared some of her extra water with distressed strangers on a recent hike at Fossil Springs. It is an ethical decision. You hate to think of things like survival of the fittest, but it does come down to that. Okay, so that's what she felt, that when it comes down to the big question, you need to make a choice and drink your own water. A hiker who had run out of water died in the Grand Canyon last weekend after some backpackers he had encountered who were parched themselves shared some of their water with him. But the hiker continued on alone, ignoring the strangers' entreaties from him to turn back towards the Colorado River, where hikers replenished their water supplies. If giving up water would endanger myself to the point that I would also become a heat casualty, I would not share, another hiker said. Rather, I would search for help before one unfortunate hiker turns into two. This kind of situation had happened before, Shannon D. Markov, spokeswoman at the Grand Canyon National Park, said. Park veterans recall at least one case where someone died trying to provide more help than they could physically afford to provide. Ms. Craig said that looking out for oneself first makes sense. It's just like an airplane. When the stewardess tells you to secure your own mask before you help people, she said, it sounds selfish, but it's right. So here comes the big question. Here you are with a few friends. What is the right thing? Do we say that it is better to, to save yourself, or is it better to save someone else? Now, why are we bringing this up? Is this considered selfish? Do you feel it's selfish? So there may be different opinions here. If you want, you can share it in the chat box. If you share your opinion, whether or not this is considered selfish. But many people may see this in different ways. And most likely there will be different opinions. If there are different opinions in this matter, is there a right or wrong answer? And the truth of the matter is, this has actually become a very big question with the whole coronavirus situation, because there was a big question that came up. If we have one ventilator and we can only save one patient, who do we save? Or do we try and do what there was some discussion about doing, about splitting ventilators, where it could be questionable if they'll both survive? So what do you do? Thank God I don't think that, at least in the United States, it come to that question, but there were definitely countries that they did come to this question, that they did not have enough supplies, and who gets those supplies? Very big question. Now, this is not so much a discussion of specifically the medical side to this, but this is a general question. But moreover, the question is really this. The question is, if we regard the Talmudic sages as expressing their own views, nothing is ori about the Talmudic debates. But if we regard the sages if we regard the Talmudic sages as those who teach us what God desires, Talmudic debates seem inappropriate. And this is really what the big question is. The question is not so much whether or not there could be different opinions. The question is, if you're saying that there are different opinions, then could you say that those opinions are all God's opinions? In other words, if you say it's rabbis telling us what they think, then fine, then you could have different opinions. Everyone could have their own opinion. Very good. But in a Talmudic debate, it's supposed to be that they're trying to teach us what God desires. Could you say that there's different ways that God would say is right or wrong in a specific situation? So with regard to Talmudic sages, there are those who taught us what God desires. So did God say A or B? Can there be a debate of what 2 + 2 equals? Could there be different opinions in the same thing, or is it just a right or wrong? And if it's just their opinion, then what's the difference if Rabbi Hecht says different than what Rabbi Akiva says? Why can I not disagree with one of the great sages? And so this is really what the question boils down to. You know, they tell a story. It was in a synagogue. It was then they came back to the synagogue after so many weeks of being away because of the corona, and finally they open up, and the congregation, they forget how to recite the Kaddish. are you supposed to recite the Kaddish standing, or are you supposed to recite the Kaddish sitting? And they're going back and forth, and you have some people saying it was always the rule in the synagogue that we recite the Kaddish, that everyone has to be standing. The other one says, no, it was always the rule in the synagogue, everyone could be sitting when they recite the Kaddish, and they're going back and forth and back and forth. You have to sit, you have to stand, you have to sit, you have to stand. And finally they said, listen, one of the older members in the synagogue, he's in a nursing home. We're going to have to give him a call and see what he says. So they give him a call, and they the ones who are in favor of the sitting in the synagogue, they give their claim why it's important to sit during Kaddish, and the other one says his opinion why it's important to stand during the Kaddish, and they're going back and forth. And they say, and he says, which one is right? And they're saying, no, I'm telling you, I remember it was sitting, I remember it was standing. They're running back and forth, back and forth. And finally he says, I think that's the way it was. They were both arguing with each other. So we could have many different opinions, and there could be many different ways of how we see things. But ultimately, the real question is there a right and wrong? Right? It's like you all remember Fiddler on the Roof, where you have a couple who comes in, and the husband, he gives his claim, and he says what the wife has been doing to him, and the rabbi listens and shakes his head and says, you're right. And then the wife comes in and she says, this is what he's been doing, and the rabbi shakes his head and says, you're right. And then the rabbi's wife comes in and says, I don't understand. How can they both be right? And he says, you're right too. So, this is really what it comes to with Jewish debate. So we have a few questions here that need to be discussed. Number one, does God say A or B? Why don't the Talmudic debates undermine the validity of the entire halachic system? Being that there are debates, does that mean that essentially the whole debate that's going on is really not, and I won't say dishonest, but really there's a flaw in it, because you're saying that it's human opinions. Number two, which areas of Jewish law are subject to debate and difference of opinions? Could you say that maybe it's right in some areas, but wrong in other areas to have a debate? Next question is, why is there a disagreement, and why would God want this at all? Maybe it should just be one clear way and make it very clear what's right and wrong. And finally, how are the debates resolved, and is there a way to resolve the debates when it comes to the when it comes to halacha, when it comes to Jewish law? So take a look in your book. Hopefully you should have it. Again, those who are just coming on, you can look in the chat box. There's a link to the book, and over there you'll see a learning exercise. And I want you to look at this. There's a likelihood for debate 1 to 5. Although in the book I did get it from someone that had it. It may be the individual that used it already checked off, but it doesn't matter. Received from 1 to 5. Do you say that a God-given explanations for each of these commandments? Okay, I'm sorry. The 1 to 5 is there a strong likelihood for unanimity? Unanimity, meaning, is there reason to say that you can debate these issues? So we're going to say the 4 types of different the oral laws that we had. Number 1, the received oral law. Could you say that there should be debate within received oral law from 1 to 5? You can write that in the chat box. A 1 means that you should be able to debate it, and a 5 means you should not be able to debate it. So received law. A 1 means you should be able to debate it. A 5 means you should not be able to debate it, or somewhere in between, meaning that which was taught to Moses. But you say, Raymond says you should not be able to debate it. Okay, derived law. Derived means something that is learned out of the biblical text, derived from the biblical text. 1 means you should be able to debate that. A 5 means you should not be able to debate it. you say you should be able to debate something that is derived from the text. Those of you who come to my Talmud class is a little unfair. The legislated, new laws legislated by rabbinic sages. 1, you should be able to debate it. 5, you should not be able to debate it, or somewhere in between. Anyone? You say you should be able to debate it. And finally, customary, customs initiated by people intended to enhance the aspect of Judaism. 1, you should be able to debate it, and 5, you should not be able to. Well, a custom is from the people. So basically what we have over here is everyone pretty much agrees that aside for the top category, which is the received law, you should be able to debate the laws. And this is actually, in essence, a true point. And this is what Maimonides points out. Now, when we talk about the received law, we have to understand that there are certain things that are not debatable. And this is what we're going to read in the next text. To understand that there are certain aspects in the Torah that are not up for question. They are axiomatic. They are accepted that this is the way it is, and that's the way they will be. Then there are certain things that are up for debate. And this is where there becomes a big misunderstanding, should I say, when it comes to oral law. Being that there's many different aspects of oral law, so many people tend to conflate the different parts of oral law. And this is part of what this course is, to clarify that. So let's take a look at the text with Maimonides, text number 2a, page 116. There are no debates at all with regards to the explanation we received from Moses. There never has risen a debate among the sages of any era, from Moses until Rav Ashi, who redacted the Talmud, in which one sage said an eye for an eye means literal retaliation, and another sage said the Torah is only referring to monetary compensation. It was always very clear that an eye for an eye means monetary compensation. That was never debated. Likewise, there never arose a dispute over the meaning of the verse, on the first day you shall take the fruit of a hadar tree. We all know what's a hadar tree. Today we know it is an esrog, whereby one sage said that the fruit was an esrog, and another said it referred to a quince, a pomegranate, or some other fruit. It's very clear that taking the hadar tree is the esrog. Nor have we come across any disagreement whether anaf eitz avos refers to myrtle branches. So there are certain things that are axiomatic, given by Moses, taught to the Jewish people, and those are things that are not up for debate, never have been, and never will be. But there are certain things that could come up for debate. Let's continue reading on the next text, text 2b. It would be very strange and disgraceful for a person to think that the Talmudic disagreements are about are about laws received from Moses, and that the debates ensued from forgetfulness or error, where one person's tradition was correct, but the other did not receive it properly, forget it, or did not study sufficiently from teachers. This view is incorrect and inconsistent with the principles of Judaism. It slurs the people from whom we receive the Torah, and it amounts to empty talk. What brings people to believe such faulty ideas is that they are insufficiently versed in the words of the Talmudic sages. They therefore fail to draw a distinction between the basic explanations that we received from Moses and the laws that the sages derived through analysis. So what are we saying over here? That there are certain things that we know came down from Moses, and there is no debate as to whether or not it's true that these things came down. We know and accept that this is fact, and this is the way it came down from Moses, and this is the way it always was. See in the picture here about Kochva, silver coin depicting a lulav and esrog. So we don't suggest and say, well, maybe someone forgot, or maybe someone didn't know, or maybe someone misunderstood Moses. Things that were very clearly taught by Moses were always passed from generation to generation, and those are things that never changed. So for example, what we have over here, on the first day you shall take the fruit of a hadar tree. The the hadar tree is an esrog that was, and always will be what the hadar tree is. So going back to our example that we gave before, we asked about the different types of oral law. So you have the received, that's God-given explanations for each of those commandments that you cannot have multiple opinions about. Those are very clear law. They cannot be changed, and that's always the way they are and always the way they will be. Next, you have the derived law. What is the derived law? Those are laws that we derive from the written Torah and the received oral Torah. That is the derived law. The derived law are things that cannot be changed. And those are things that sometimes could be debated and sometimes not. The legislative law, those are things that are new laws legislated by rabbinic sages that absolutely there could sometimes be debate with. And of course, customs, there can be debate. Those are things that are initiated by people intended to enhance an aspect of Judaism. And we're going to talk more about these soon. So we have these different things and the different ways it is second. One second. Doesn't look like this is. All right. So now, let me go back to this. So, okay. Let us continue. So let's take a look at some debates that come up. Text number. So you have a question. Now we're going to go back to the original question that we had. The original question was about the water in the desert. You're walking in the desert and you have to know, you're not sure, what are you supposed to do? You only have enough water for one. Or the other example we gave, you have a ventilator and you only have one ventilator. You own the ventilator. Are you to share it with someone else or not? So the Torah tells us like this. This is a biblical text. And it says like this, text 3a. When your brother becomes destitute, I'm sorry. And his hand falters beside you, you shall support him, whether a convert or a resident, so that he can live with you. You shall not take interest from him. Fear your God and let your brother live with him. Okay? So what do we see? You shall not take interest from him. Fear your God and let your brother live with you. Let your brother live with you. So how do you interpret these words, let your brother live with you? If you think for a moment, which of the phrase supports your view? Based on what you're reading now, think for a moment and tell me, or write in the chat box. Based on what we say, let your brother live with you, do you think that that means that you shall share your water or that you shall not share your water? Anyone want to share something? Share your opinion about sharing your water. Put it up in the chat. And brother live with, and let your brother live with you. Is it saying that you shall share your water or not share your water? Any thoughts? Share my water. Okay. Do you have a reason for that? If you share your water for one, you both die. Okay. Perhaps you should invite him to travel with you and share water. But, well, the problem is that it's either one or both. Either one's going to live with the water or both are going to die with the water. So the truth is you're all putting valid points, and that's why. So this is an example of where you have a debate. So let's take a look. And this is where the derived has different opinions. So we have two opinions. One is Pen Petura, and he says like this: when it says, "Let your brother live with you," he says, "With you" implies the same as you. With you. The Torah says your brother has to live with you. It means exactly the same. If you have one piece of bread, you got to share that piece of bread. One jug of water, you have to share that jug of water. If it means you're both going to die, then you both die. The Torah is telling you your brother has to live with you. Rabbi Akiva says with you means with you. Means that you're coming first, then he's going to be with you. If there's no you, then there's no with you. That's the way Rabbi Akiva says. So they're essentially reading the exact same verse in the Torah, and they're implying in two different ways. Let's take a look at text 3b. Two people are traveling in the desert, and one of them has only one flask of water. If he drinks it, he will reach town. If both of them drink it, they will both die. Ben Petura derived that both should drink from it and die. As it says, "Let your brother live with you." Rabbi Akiva said to him, "Let your brother live with you," implying your life takes precedence over the life of another. In other words, if you're not living, he's not living with you. So that's what Rabbi Akiva derives, that he needs to live with you. It's interesting that Rabbi Akiva is the one that always focuses on v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, love of your fellow as yourself. And it seems that Rabbi Akiva is putting a stress and saying that you shouldn't let that overtake yourself. In other words, your love of your friend has to be as yourself. You have to love yourself too. So here we see how you can have a debate in the derived or what we say received Torah, how it's derived in different ways. Now, this is clearly a derived question. Could there be a debate in the received Torah, in the received aspect of it? So Maimonides is going to say that there is a yes and no to that. You could have a debate in the received Torah, but only in the derived aspect of the received Torah. What do we mean by that? So we're going to give an example. We said before, we gave an example that so debates are only about derivations without questioning the received laws. How does that work? So we have, for example, the fruit of the Hadar tree. Okay? And we said before, there is no debate. This is an axiomatic law. There is no debate that a fruit of a Hadar tree is an esrog. It's that tree, it's that fruit right there. Most people don't even know what an esrog is. It's called in English a citron. Many people don't even know what it is, and it grows, for the most part, they grow in Italy. So then you know it's a really high quality fruit. It grows in Italy. If it's Italian, it has to be good fruit, right? It's actually interesting. There's been some discussion about this coming Sukkot, if the coronavirus is going to affect our esrog supply, being that Italy was hit so hard, and one of the biggest suppliers of esrogs are from Italy. Just interesting to see what happens, but don't be surprised if the price of esrog is going to be way up this year. Just a side note. So, so the fact that the fruit of a Hadar tree is an esrog, that cannot be debated. But there is some room for debate, and that's as follows. Let's read again Maimonides text number 4. It's in text number 4 in your book. When you find Talmudic sages discussing, debating, and bringing proofs for any of these received explanations or others like it, they are not arguing over the validity or the nature of the received law. but rather how it might be derived from biblical text. For example, the sages discuss the fruit of a hadar tree and ask, but maybe it refers to some fruit other than an etrog. That then being proof from the words fruit and tree to indicate that it must be a fruit of a tree whose bark tastes the same as its fruit, which is true of the etrog. Okay, this is one way to read it. Another sage finds hint for the etrog in the word hadar, explaining that the word hadar can also mean to dwell, indicating that it is a fruit that can dwell in the tree from one year to the next, which is the characteristic of an etrog. A third sage, noting a similarity between hadar and the Greek haidar, meaning water, says this indicates it's a fruit that grows on much water, which is true of an etrog. The sages did not offer these derivations because they were not sure of what the Torah meant by fruit of hadar tree. From the days of Joshua until today, Jews took a lulav and etrog year after year without debate. The sages were merely investigating the biblical allusion of this received tradition. So we could have different ways of how we can allude the fact that the esrog is that when it says hadar tree, it's referring to the esrog. How can we make that allusion? So one way to look at it is that the fruit of the tree whose bark tastes the same, tam she'etzo upiryo shaveh, that he learns it out from the fact that the fruit tree tastes the same of the bark. And this is true of an etrog. I never tasted an etrog bark, so I can't really tell you for a fact that's what it is, but we'll have to take the word for it. It's a fruit that can dwell, hadar beilano. In other words, hadar, the word hadar itself means just beauty, it means just a beautiful fruit. It could be many beautiful fruits. So why the word hadar? So hadar means to dwell. Hadar beilano mishana l'shana, it dwells in its tree from year to year. Or the other one is that it grows. Hadar comes from haidar, like hydration, which is water. So the point of the matter is that what we see is that there are certain laws that are accepted, that this is the way it is. And then the derived law, the derivation aspect of it is not necessarily to find out if or not it's actually so, but to bring more proof and more explanation to that which is already received, adding on, putting together the derived and the received as one. Okay? All right. Amar Rabbi Akiva said, if it is law passed down from Sinai, we will accept. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is a very interesting thing. We see that there was Rabbi Akiva was listening to his teacher, Rabbi Joshua. This is Sinai. Very relevant. Sinai is for this week. The Jewish people standing on Sinai happened today. So Rabbi Yoshua was teaching a law to his student, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva did not particularly agree with the law that was being taught by his teacher, but he said like this. He said, if the law passed down from Sinai, we will accept it, but if you're deriving it, it can be disproved. So he said, I don't know exactly what the law was, but he said, if you're deriving this law and it's your own understanding of the derivation, I think that it can be disproved. If you're telling me that this is the way it was passed down, I can't disprove that. So there's certain things that are axiomatic, that they're very clear, this is the way it is and cannot be changed. So if he was teaching, let's say, using the logic of the Kal V'chomer, like we taught earlier in one of the previous lessons, so the Kal V'chomer can sometimes be disputed. It may not always be the best proof. So when you have derivations, they could be disputed. But when it comes to the actual law, those are things that, if it's received from Sinai, cannot be changed. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Well, then let's move on. Again, you can always post questions in the chat if you ever have. And we'll get to them as soon as I can. Okay, text number 6. This is debate in legislated and customary. This is the next spot. So we talked about debate in legislated. We talked about the debate in the legislated when it is together with the derived. Now we're going to talk about the legislated together with the customary. It is possible for there to be a debate with regard to the laws that were established by the prophets and sages in each generation, when they enacted measures to protect people from violating a prohibition in the Torah. One sage might prohibit something for a particular reason, whereas another one could disagree. You find this often in the Talmud where it says, the rabbi prohibited such and such because of this and that, and another rabbi did not issue this prohibition. So unfortunately, this did not work with regards to the chicken and milk, the fowl and milk. So that one is still agreed upon by all the rabbis. But here we're going to give a very interesting one. This is the law of polygamy. We all know that biblically, according to the biblical law, polygamy is accepted biblically. However, as you see in text number 7, Rabbeinu Gershom declared excommunication upon a polygamous man, but this enactment did not take hold in all lands. So Rabbeinu Gershom, one of the early sages, he was living then in a time in Germany where polygamy was not accepted in society that they were living in Germany at the time. And it also, for a number of reasons, he instituted it, and he also felt that most people weren't in a financial state to be able to support many wives. It also wasn't going to look good in their neighbors. And in general, it was something that Ashkenazi Jews took upon themselves based on the teachings of Rabbeinu Gershom. Nevertheless, he was living in an Ashkenazi community, Germany, Poland, but the Sephardic communities never met, some of them never even heard of it, and some of them never even accepted it. And that's why you have till today, those who come from the Sephardi communities, they may still halachically allow polygamy, and especially those coming from places like Morocco or Indonesia, not Indonesia. I forget all the names of the Jewish Sephardic communities, but there are Sephardic communities that never accepted this. Now, today, for the most part, being that it's pretty much nationally, it's pretty much universally accepted, the idea of not having polygamy for the most part. So what some Sephardic communities, they actually add in their ketubah a stipulation that the groom is not going to marry another woman. But in the Ashkenazi community, it's not necessary because it's already accepted as a law. So, but the point is that you can have a legislated law that's legislated for a certain reason, and not all communities are going to accept it, and not everyone will see it in the same way. So there could definitely be debate when we talk about legislation. So are there debates about facts? There's no debates about the received oral Torah. And does this completely answer the question? No, because the derived oral law is also divinely given. Wait, do we get to that? Okay. And this is the point that we want to get to. This is ultimately where it really comes the question. And as I was saying, that on one hand, there are laws that come about that could be debated. Then we say that there's no debates with regards to the received oral law. So is the oral law divine or not? And this is where it gets a little bit intricate with the way we're going to look at it. And that is that even though there's different opinions, and even though there's different views in how it is, nevertheless, all of them are considered divinely given. Text number 8, both the written Torah and the oral Torah are God-given. How can we assert that the oral Torah is God-given? How can we assert that things that are generally derived, that those are God-given if they're derived? Isn't it human mind? Isn't it human mind involvement? So the answer is that what's happening is the Torah is discovering, when you're bringing about a derivation of a law, you're discovering what is God's will. You want to understand, what does God want from me in this place? And so accordingly, the fact that we excluded debate from the received oral Torah, it's not completely that we're excluding debate from the oral Torah as a whole, but we're saying that there is a God aspect to that. And this is where the most incredible part of this whole discussion is. And that is that even though there are different opinions, and even though there's different views, and even though there's different ways of seeing this, everyone is discovering a godly aspect within the Torah that they are teaching. Text number 9a, the Talmud tells us as follows. The Talmud says, some sages rule that an object is ritually impure, and others rule that it is pure. Some forbid while others permit. Some disqualify while others declare fit. A person may ask, why study Torah under such circumstances, if there's so many different opinions? The verse therefore says, all were given from one shepherd. One God gave them, one leader communicated them from the mouth of God, as it is written, and God spoke all these words. So God taught everything. And continuation, next one, text 9b, for each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments for ruling that an object was ritually pure, and 49 arguments for ruling that an object was ritually impure. So God essentially taught everything to Moses in Sinai. We may not have been given everything clearly word for word in that way, but God gave that to us. And God wanted that we should have our part in discovering what his intention is and what his real wish and desire is in each of these laws. And so God himself is saying there's many different ways to see this, and there's many multiple and divergent opinions. And God himself is telling Moses, look, there's many different ways to see it in this way, many different ways to see it in that way. And he showed Moses how various laws can be derived. And he provided arguments in both directions, and sometimes without telling Moses a final ruling. And God said, it's up to you to come up with the right with the right decision. Now, for many years, for many generations, it was done in a way that the Sanhedrin, which was the rabbinical court, would come with the final ruling. However, after time went on, the Sanhedrin lost its strength and power because the destruction of the temple and other things that happened. And that is essentially where the concept of having one final law changed. But nevertheless, the fact that there are different opinions doesn't mean that one is godly and the other one is not godly. They both are. Look in text 9c. For 3 years, there was a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The former asserting the halacha is in agreement with our views, and the latter contending the halacha is in agreement with our views. A heavenly voice declared, these and these are words of the living God. So how could it be that you have different opinions and both of them are words of the living God? How could it be? Either it's right or wrong. And this is where it's important to see that multifaceted and multidimensional aspects of the Torah doesn't mean that it has to be one way or another. Let's read on, text number 10. Rabbi Yehuda Lau, known as the Maharal of Prague, the famous one who created the Golem, he says as follows. It is not possible for anything in this world to have just one aspect to it. Even if something is ritually impure, it must contain an aspect of ritual purity. And when something is ritually pure, it must have an aspect of ritual impurity. One feature of a particular case can elicit a verdict of innocence, and another feature a verdict of guilt. One facet of a particular item or action can indicate permitted, while another facet indicates prohibited. The same applies with regard to an item or action that is either valid or invalid. This is true in general for the world we inhabit, where objects are comprised of multiple elements. One can say about a tree that is comprised of water, and another can say it's comprised of oxygen, and both are speaking truth. When someone declares an item ritually pure and presents arguments to prove it, this person has demonstrated only one aspect of reality. Similarly, when one declares it is ritually impure, it reflects only one aspect of reality. There is no doubt, however, that the purpose of practical halacha, one aspect is more important than the other. Although God created things with multiple facets, one of them is more significant, and this is what determines the actual halacha. Still, do not say that the less significant aspects are wholly unimportant. This is not true, for when we hear of all the opinions, we comprehend the item in its totality with all its features and components, and spelled out in the Torah. It is only with regard to the practical final ruling that one feature outweighs the others. So when we say that there is a specific ruling and that's the way you need to follow, it doesn't mean that the other ways are wrong. The other ways have true aspects to it and are very true in its own way. So when something is kosher or something is treif, we have to give a final ruling on that thing to be kosher or treif, but it doesn't mean that there are certain aspects to it of it not being kosher. We talked about the two different types of deriving Torah. We said one a kal v'chomer and one a binyan av. Both of these are true ways of how we can study Torah, but none of them exclude the other way of studying. To take a physical example of this, and there's always been a debate among scientists whether or not light is a wave or a particle. So this has always been a great debate among scientists: is light a wave or a particle? So but eventually they went and they made some experiments with electrons, and they found that light is actually made up of both waves and particles. And that's how you can have, when you shine light in certain things, it will come out in one way. When you shine that same light through other things, it may be another way. And when you shine it through a glass, it will come out as a rainbow. And when you shine it through this thing, it will look in another way, because essentially it has both aspects within it. Now, scientists maybe don't understand it 100%, but the facts are there. You could have many different aspects to one thing. An atom could be a very small thing, but at the same time has within it capabilities that are beyond what that atom is. A brain is able to comprehend. Is a brain physical, or is it a spiritual facet of the body? It's both. It has a physical aspect and it has a spiritual aspect to it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one is true and the other is not. And this is what we see, that there could be different things that are sometimes good and sometimes bad. They say, for example, in most fruits, an apple has, when it grows in the ground, it has a nutrient called cyanide, right? Is that what it's called? Cyanide, you would for sure know that. Vivian would know about this more. Cyanide is a deadly poison, right? Am I saying this correctly? It's a deadly poison, yet it is found in the fruit that we're eating. And the body has the ability to overcome it. So on one hand, you could say apple has a deadly poison in it. You could also say apple is very healthy and it has so many good vitamins. Both of those are true, right? Both of those are true aspects. But at the end of the day, you have to make a ruling. Should you eat the apple or should you not eat the apple? The answer is you should eat the apple. Doesn't mean that there is not certain components of it that is deadly. Yes, there are certain components of it that is. And you can't say that that's not true. So when you have a debate, it doesn't mean that there's one way that's wrong or another. When you're studying the law of God, there are different facets to it and there's different aspects to it, and it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. We said, for example, 3 different opinions as to why an esrog is called a hadar tree. All those are right. They're all true things. It doesn't mean that one has to be right or one has to be wrong. Now, there are certain times when you have to come to a ruling and say, this is the ultimate, we have to decide yes or no. You know, just like recently we had, you have this big debate. Do we open up or do we not open up? Right? It's the big debate of the coronavirus. Jogging is great for your lungs, but horrible for the knees. Oh, very good. See, so you have different things. Jogging is everyone would say, is it healthy to jog? Of course it's healthy to jog, but someone will come along and say, no, it's not healthy to jog. Well, there's a certain truth to that as well. It doesn't mean that everything is in one way. Is it safe to open up our economy, or is it not safe to open up our economy? Some people will say, absolutely, we must open up right now. Some people will say, no, we cannot open up, it's not safe. Both of those are true in a certain aspect to it. And the problem is that in our society, we completely lost the feel of debate. There's no more debate. You can't have an honest debate. You know, when I was in yeshiva, today, they'll tell you, you want to go study, you go to a library. You walk in the library, it's very quiet. No one's talking, everyone's reading, everyone's just taking in information. You go into a yeshiva hall and it's loud, it's noisy. What do you see? You see two students sitting across from each other, screaming at each other, arguing with each other, going back and forth. No, you're right. No, you're wrong. No, you're right. No, you're wrong. Screaming back and forth at each other. And then next thing you know, they're at lunch, they're eating, they're enjoying each other's company as if nothing ever happened. Healthy debate is good debate. And you could still be friends and you could still appreciate people's company. It doesn't mean that one is completely right and one is completely wrong. There are different ways of seeing it, and they're both true. Text number 11. Talmudic debate is like a musical harmony. The Torah is called a melody. The beauty of melody is when the sounds are different from each other, this is the primary pleasantness of song. And that's why it's so beautiful to listen to many different aspects. Some people will say that the violin is the most beautiful instrument. Some people will say the trumpet is the most beautiful instrument. Some people will say there's nothing like the drums. But now you bring them all together and you have the most beautiful harmony that you can ever have. One who swims in the sea of the Talmud will find pleasure in each of these different sounds. Now, ultimately, as I said, you need to come to a ruling, and that is what's called halacha. Halacha is determining what ultimately the ruling is, because at the end of the day, you have to know, so what should I do? I see both aspects are right, so what should I do? Should I open the shul or should I close the shul? I have to know, what should I do? And this is Moses himself had this question, text number 12. For each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments for ruling that an object was ritually pure, and 49 arguments for ruling that the object was ritually impure. Moses said before, Master of the universe, how will I be able to reach the practical conclusion? God responded, follow the majority. If the majority rules it is ritually impure, it is impure. If the majority rules pure, it is pure. This is what God says. You need to follow the majority. Even though you may feel other ways, and even though you may feel that your way is 100% correct, nevertheless, God said that ultimately you follow the majority and you do what they do. Continue on text 13. As long as the Sanhedrin was in existence, there was no enduring halachic debates among the Jewish people. A Jew had a doubt about a particular law, would inquire of the local Bet Din, which is a Jewish court. If the judges knew the answer, they would tell him. If not, the questioner would go together to the Bet Din or its representatives to Jerusalem and ask the Bet Din that sat in the Temple Mount. If the judges knew the answer, they would tell him. If not, they would all go to Bet Din that sat by the entrance to the temple courtyard. If the judges knew the answer, they would tell them. If not, they would go to the chamber of hewn stones where the Sanhedrin convened. The Sanhedrin knew the answer because it had received tradition about it, because it was derived, or because it derived it, it would say so immediately. If the answer was not immediately clear to the Sanhedrin, its members would discuss it until everyone agreed, or they would put it to a vote and the law would follow the majority. But once the Sanhedrin ceased to exist, this is where the problem started. Divergent opinions proliferated. One sage would rule that the article is ritually impure and support this ruling with a rationale. Another would rule that it is pure and support this ruling with a rationale. One would rule, and this is where you essentially start having the debates. So the idea of debates is not something new. It goes all the way back to Moses. The difference is that as long as we had the Sanhedrin, which was the governing rabbinical court, so if there was a debate, you were able to come to a final halachic agreement in one way or another. The problem is that once the Sanhedrin was no more ruling, that's when it became a problem, because then you had different opinions without a final rule in one way or another. So what do? So this is what you do. Text number 12 will tell us what happened. So what do you finally do? What you finally do is as follows. Text 14, it is incumbent upon all Jews to follow all the rulings recorded in the Babylonian Talmud. Each city and each province must follow the customs endorsed by the Talmud and must enforce all rabbinic legislation mentioned therein. This is because the Jewish people agreed to all these rulings, and because all the Jewish sages, or at least the majority of them, issued those decrees and edicts, endorsed those customs, derived those applications, and handed down those final halachic rulings. So he's giving us 2 points here. He's telling us that all Jews during the Talmudic times accepted the rulings of the Talmud, and B, that all or most of the Jewish sages of the day were involved in its final redaction. And so you have 2 things here. You have number 1, the majority, that you're following the majority, because the majority of the sages agreed to what the Talmud says, and also that it was accepted by the majority. And the Talmud is not going to write it unless it was something that was accepted by the majority. And this is relevant for the rabbinic legislation as opposed to the derived laws. As mentioned in lesson 3, the rabbinic law was not accepted by the people. The rabbinic law that is not accepted by the people is automatically void no matter who legislated it. So Moshe, the Sanhedrin, or the majority of the Talmudic sages, it all has to come down to something that's accepted in the Talmud means it's accepted by the people. So if the debate is resolved in the Talmud, it is a resolved matter. Nobody can choose to follow the opinions of Beis Shammai or the other rejected opinion, but even if there's a debate, we have to follow what the Talmud says as the final ruling. So what happens if you have a debate today? So you can have a debate where the rabbis are debating the meaning of a Talmudic ruling. That could be one problem where there would be a debate today. Or you could have a debate that arose after the Talmud was completed. So for example, we gave the example earlier about a ventilator. There were obviously no ventilators in the time of the Talmud. So now we have to see, could we apply this ruling to a ventilator, which is a modern invention, or not? Same thing with regards to cars, or with regards to genomes, or things that we have today. Could we apply those things, and could we learn something out for something that's completely new and came after the Talmud? And finally, there could be an issue where the Talmud itself stands without resolving it, and that could be a question as well. And this is where Judaism has a diversity in actual practice. And then it comes to the question of you have to know which rabbi you follow and which halachic ruling you follow. And ultimately, that's what it's going to boil down to. So if you have a modern question, so you have to go to a certain rabbinic, the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our father, Aseh Lecha Rav. You have to make a rabbi for you. That you have to have a rabbi that you trust in a certain area of halacha, in a certain place in halacha, to know that you are that this is going to be your authority for anything that comes up, even though there may be other opinions in the matter. And you could have different rabbis for different things. And there are certain rabbis who are professional in certain areas. For example, there are certain rabbis who are very well versed in the modern technology that's associated with Shabbos things. There are certain rabbis who are very well versed in the modern technology that has to do with cloning, let's say, or genome issues. There's certain rabbis who are very well knowledgeable when it comes to debates about children or things that have to do with like abortion or things of that nature. Some rabbis that are very more knowledgeable when it comes to marriage issues or divorce issues. So you could have all kinds of things that come up, and there may be certain rabbis that are especially knowledgeable in certain areas, and there are certain rabbis who are considered, the rabbis of the generation. You have like Rabbi, what was his name? Slips my mind. Anyway, so you do have certain halachic authorities who are the rulers. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. That's what I was thinking of. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, is a known halachic authority for our generation and accepted as such. You have the Tzitz Eliezer, another modern day halachic authority. So you have many different people who are, bigger rabbis, if you will, in the authority. But you also have to, that individual has to also understand what is the modern technology and what's associated with it. And now the last part. Any questions before we get to the last point? No? Okay. And finally, the ultimate thing that we need to know is how important it is for peace and unity. Text number 15, God found no better vessel than peace to hold blessing for the Jewish people. For it says, the Lord shall grant strength to his people. The Lord shall bless his people with peace. Now, what is peace? Peace, you can say, is that everyone gets along and everyone agrees and everyone says the same thing. That's not really peace. Peace is when you have two opposites and still you can coexist and live with each other. You have two people with different opinions, people with different ideas, people with different ways of looking at each other, and yet you still are able to live together. You're able to accept each other's opinions. You're able to accept the fact that there are different ways of seeing things. And this is ultimately what real peace is. For there to be peace, you need diversity. If everyone was just a bunch of robots and everyone just thought the same and said the same and did everything exactly the same, that's not peace. Peace is when you're able to take the different opinions, bring them together, join them together, and this is how you ultimately have the true peace. So it was this, when we have halacha, practical halacha. Halacha means that you are taking all the different opinions, you're seeing that they essentially are all true, but we need to see what are we going together to see everything in one way and accept that as a Jewish people. And at that moment, true peace dawned on the Jewish people. And if there's no debates, that's not true peace. When there's debates, that's true peace. That's seeing the other opinions and seeing them and appreciating for what they are. And I should end by saying that this is very much associated to the day that we're on today, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the first day of the month of Sivan, because as we said, that this is the day that the Jewish people arrived at Mount Sinai. And it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. They rested, they camped there by the mountain. When it says that the Jewish people camped, it uses the word Vayichan, and he camped in a singular. And our sages say, why does he use the term in a singular, that he camped? It's because they camped ki ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. Even though there may have been different opinions, there was a lot of quarreling and arguing, but when it came to receiving the Torah, they all knew that they have to accept it with one heart, in the same way with love together. And this is ultimately what brings the revelation of the receiving of the Torah that they received in Mount Sinai. And so as we are now in preparation for the holiday of Shavuos, the greatest thing that we could do is peace, to share together peace. And we hope and pray that it will happen very soon, speedily in our days, that we'll come together to the Holy Land of Jerusalem with its ultimate peace and share that together. I'm going to show a quick video before we conclude. One second, let me just share this now.
Lesson 4. Key points. 1. There are no rabbinic debates regarding the received oral Torah, but it is common for debates to appear in the derived, legislated, and customary categories of Torah. 2. At times, God embedded in the Torah multiple clues leading to variant outcomes. The resultant dissenting opinions are therefore both the words of the living God. 3. Both conflicting opinions reflect a divine perspective regarding the case under discussion, and it is only through hearing all perspectives that we learn about the object or case in its entirety. 4. The final halakha was determined by the majority of the Sanhedrin. 5. The Talmud's rulings are binding for all Jews, inasmuch as the majority of Jewish sages of its day ratified its decisions. 6. Rabbinic debates are a paradigm of peaceful relations. Peace requires divergent viewpoints that then peacefully resolve. When the Sanhedrin was operational, a legal dispute ideally ended with the minority agreeing with the majority ruling. Next week, are there areas of Jewish law that can use change or repeal? If yes, who has the authority to amend or revoke? A heavenly voice? A prophet? A sage? Is modifying rabbinic enactments a simple process? After all, what human beings create, they should be able to abrogate. When we meet next time, we will consider these important questions.
Also, I hope everyone got the email. In the email, I also posted some other interesting videos